Hi, welcome to Both Sides of the Desk. I'm Charlie Charlton, and each week we have one boss, one employee to talk work culture. Why? Well, as a journalist, I host a lot of business conferences, and it is the one subject that keeps coming up. How do we create and keep happy, high-performing teams? So to give the honest, sometimes awkward answers to that, we have the transatlantic law firm Womble Bond Dickinson. On one side of the desk, we have Ian Atkinson, a partner with the firm. He specialises in the construction industry. And on the other side of the desk, we have Francesca Hodgson, who specialises in regulatory and compliance issues. Now, she was a lowly legal director, but was promoted to salary partner just before we recorded this episode. Still technically an employee, though.
You've got a number of professions where there has continually been an entrance point and an expectation from a class system that everybody would maybe prefer not to exist, but still does. So how do you encourage opportunities for all within the legal profession? And I'm going to turn to you on this, Francesca, because you came from a working class background. It was just you and your mum at home together, and you had this massive love of books and then ended up going to Oxford to study law. This was an environment you didn't really know.
Well, I never really thought of it that way, sort of growing up. I'm told that I told my Sunday school teacher when I was 6 that I was going to Oxford. And I just didn't see the world that way, or I didn't think that I did. And I'd always just sort of assumed that if I wanted to do something, I could do it. It never really occurred to me otherwise. But having said that, when I did go to my interviews, I did have a bit more of a chip on my shoulder than on reflection than I thought, because I insisted in going in. Everyone was quite smart and dressed up. I went in jeans and T-shirts and was sort of like, this is a little bit of sort of, well, this is who I am, sort of take it or leave it attitude. And I think it was actually when I got there more that I realised the differences, because some of the people who you meet there from a different background, it's just a different perspective as to what's normal. I didn't know any lawyers growing up. Quite a lot of people, their parents were partners at law firms, that sort of thing. Their ideas about what you would do in the summer holidays were different, either some sort of internship at some city place or backpacking around somewhere. I think there's the connections element, and there's also a certain amount of polish that you get if you're from a certain background, gone to a certain school. It's sort of trained into you more. And there's an ease that some people will have in, say, a networking situation or a large meeting that seems from the outside just more natural. I mean, it is acquired. All of these things are acquired. But when you're sort of 25 and other people have it and you don't in the same way, that it seems very natural to them. And you have to find your own, you have to find what that looks like for you, which is not acting like them. It is finding your own way to be in those rooms and, navigate those sorts of conversations. So I think it's polish, that's the word that I would use.
So are you talking about the way that you would talk to people, the way that you would dress, the various interactions?
Yeah, this social codes. You're at a networking event, how do you start the conversation? How do you extricate yourself politely from the conversation? All of that sort of thing. It takes a little while to pick up. And I think to sort of slightly pivot, one of the things about COVID and people being away from the office for so long is that, sort of irrespective of social backgrounds, the sort of trainees and NQs and things coming in have missed a couple of years of seeing how all of that works and having the opportunity to attend events and be around people and sort of learn that social stuff.
Which would help them grow in their jobs.
Yes.
And all. So it is important. It feels, I don't know, a bit soft touch, but actually it's very important.
Because, dealing with people is, 80, 90% of the job, actually. Yes, you have to sit down, you write advice notes, you write letters, all of that sort of thing. But actually, I spend most of my day dealing with people, like talking on Teams, talking on the phone, talking to colleagues. And that is a much bigger part of the job than people would anticipate, perhaps.
It's fascinating hearing that, I think. For yourself, you came from what you've described as quite a comfortable background. Your parents were entrepreneurs and had a chain of successful stores. You weren't from a dukedom.
No.
we weren't hitting those heights. But that level of social mobility, that understanding about networking and contacts and how to present yourself, and how do you do that so there is parity of opportunity within a company?
Yeah, and that's something like social mobility, equality is something I'm really passionate about. Ideally, what you want to be doing is just identifying the best people. You want to be identifying potential. We know we've got the right environment to then develop the potential and create really good lawyers. So how do you identify the best people when, as you said, Francesca, some people naturally start from a better place than others? So we start by going in and talking to all the schools in the area. We've got people who almost their sole job is to be out there talking to schools to say, these are opportunities that exist.
How young do you start with that?
So they'll go in and start from sort of 16 through to 18. So
they've already made their options choices. They're thinking about the next stage.
Yeah, they might be thinking about a career in professional services or whatever. And we go along, and one of the things we're very proud of is our solicitor apprenticeships. So we started our apprenticeships back in 2017, so quite an earlier adopter. We've already got lawyers now, qualified lawyers, coming out the back of that. So we've demonstrated that this works, that we can find the right people. So they would join us at 18.
And this is from schools? We're not just talking fee-paying schools?
Oh, absolutely not. This is across all schools in the area, because we're just looking for talent. And talent comes in lots of different shapes and forms. So we want to encourage those who are perhaps in schools that aren't the best performing schools. So when we're assessing candidates now, we look and say, how have they compared against their peers? So this person might have got 3 Bs at A-level, which is great, but actually the average at that school is 3 Ds. So this person's really outperforming their peers. If they'd gone to a fee-paying school, this person's probably 3 As. And so we start to bake that in to our system so that when we're looking at candidates, we look at how they perform, but then we add in the rare index. And the other thing it brings in is red flags. If they've qualified for school, free school meals, that's identified as well and attracts a score that pushes them a little bit further. So what we're trying to do is level the playing field, to take away some of the coaching and privilege that some people get by going to a really good school. And they don't all have to be fee-paying schools, because you could look in this area, there are some state schools that hugely outperform others.
I mean, my school would come into that category, certainly.
Yours was not a fee-paying school, but the grades that everybody was achieving were considerably higher. Yeah. For the region.
So you have to look at that and say, well, actually, that's a really good school, so we're not going to give this person as much credit, as it were, as if they'd gone to this school here, which actually in special measures, and they still managed to get 3 Bs.
But is this just a form of positive discrimination? And isn't...
I hope not. I hope not, because...
What's the deal with that? How do we feel about...
Well, positive discrimination to me means that you're deliberately altering the outcome of a system to get a desired end result. So you're switching around the mechanism to get underrepresented people into a position where perhaps they're not best qualified to be, and perhaps they don't have the necessary abilities to perform that role. And that can't be right, because our clients at the end of the day want the best lawyers. What they don't want is somebody who happens to be a good lawyer, but from an underrepresented group. That's not what they want. So you've got to try, that's what comes down to identifying the best potential and then building from that potential. So positive discrimination to me can't be a good thing, but leveling the playing field and making sure that we're just looking for pure talent is what we're aiming for.
What do you reckon to that?
So I think that positive discrimination can be sort of a bit of a dirty word, but if you are trying to identify potential and level the playing field, that's the that's the way that I think about it. I also think that actually the people who have historically benefited from the structure, the way our society is structured, just don't realise that they have been positively discriminated against their whole lives. The way that the whole society is set up is in their favour, but that's the default, that's the norm. So any challenge to that, any scheme which disrupts that, can be received negatively, when actually, who says that the way things have always been is the way that they should have been set up? Who says that just because you started here, you should get to go there? You don't get to do that. So I think that part of the pushback, I'm less nervous about the phrase than other people, because I think part of the pushback to that as a term and as a concept is actually it's challenging the structures that have been there for a long time, and the people who benefited from them, it's going to make them uncomfortable. And I'm okay with that.
And I would want to see that challenge to traditional processes that haven't necessarily worked. But if you as a candidate worked hard, got a job or a position in a business that you really wanted, and then there was a sense that you got that because of where you'd come from rather than the talent you brought to that role, surely that would undermine your feeling of self-worth and achievement, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so I think nobody wants to think that they've got a promotion or a job or anything else because of positive discrimination. And because everybody wants to, people have earned it and they want to feel like they've earned it. But I also think you shouldn't set things up to promote that, obviously. So the way that you explain what you're doing and why and what you're actually trying to achieve, and that you're not just trying to manipulate the outcome, you're trying to actually get the right people, is important. But you also can't stop people from thinking like that. I met somebody on holiday before I started Oxford, a family who said, oh, you must have gotten there because you're from a poor postcode. Well, she shouldn't think that if she wants. That's a thought that's in her head. I can't control that. That wasn't correct. So I think that what you're right, that we need to be careful that we don't set things up so that it's sort of an easy, sort of careless thing for people to throw around and then undermine people's credibility in that role. But I also think that you can't control how other people are going to respond to challenges to the status quo. And that is an obvious way that people will sometimes respond to that. And so it's important that when those individuals are coming through the system, that the way that we're dealing with them makes them confident in themselves, that they do deserve it and they do earn it, and that if anybody does want to throw around things like that, well, that's on them. That's a reflection on them and not a reflection on the candidate.
And I think, again, maybe this is law firms being different to other businesses, but we adopt quite a bit of rigour when it comes to internal promotions. So from the very first time you apply for promotion within our business, there are an expected set of performance standards. And those are measured by an appointments committee, and you're then determined as to whether you can be promoted or not. So I would like to think that people are able to evidence, and line managers are able to evidence why someone has earned that promotion, because they can refer back to the application against the performance standards. So if there was a whiff of bitterness because somebody had taken a promotion over somebody else who felt they were due that promotion, you would be able to have an honest conversation and say, well, the reason is this person excels here, here, and here. You've still got a bit of work to do here, here, and here. I
think that it does help in our industry how measurable things are, because you can have the sort of data to back up the decisions that are being made.
Let's talk about the investment in the building, because you could have reconfigured your office space in so many ways. And many people working for a big global law firm would assume that the guys at the top are going to have the best offices with the best views, and they're going to have the balcony, they're going to have all the show. That isn't what happened at your place. Arguably, the best space was given over to everybody by putting in a canteen. What was the thinking behind that?
Exactly. That was one of the partners in one of our meetings, just threw that out there as an option. So we had initially thought top floor with the balcony, well, that's where our client meeting rooms should be, and that's where, you know, potentially some of the executive offices might be, or do we let one of our teams take that space? And if we do let one of the teams take that space, which team's it going to be? Because they all think they're the best. So how are we going to manage that? And then someone just said, actually, why don't we put our canteen up there? If we want people to come into the office, if we want random conversations to happen, let's give the best space to our people. The best space is the most utilised. And what we found is it has worked in terms of bringing people together, putting them on tables so that, you know, when they go for lunch, I'll sometimes sit with you and sometimes sit with other people. Sometimes I'll sit with my team. It does spark off random conversations. But perhaps more importantly, it produced a sort of safe space for people to get time away from the desk to go and have informal or sometimes formal conversations over a cup of coffee. Because in our previous office, if you wanted to have a chat with someone maybe on their appraisal, you might have booked a meeting room, and all of a sudden that's taken on a level of formality that's not perhaps conducive to transparency and open. Whereas if you're saying, oh, we haven't had a catch up for a while, let me buy you a coffee, and you go and you sit there and you've got lovely views of the Tyne Valley and St James Park and everything like that. It just created the right atmosphere for people to perhaps talk a bit more.
So many companies set up these networks. Yours is called Thrive, and they've always got that kind of branding. This is, you know, fits our corporate brand, and it says something really positive. But in practical terms, does everybody really have a say? And those messages, how are they pushed up the chain to make a change in policy, say?
So we split it up into different pillars, which each have a different focus, so that there's a bit of direction as to what you're doing. So there's internal engagement, external engagement, a few different ones. And the one that I do is projects and accountability. And that is specifically around identifying things we can do in a firm differently. So what happens is we sort of take soundings on what people are bothered about, what we as the sort of panel members are aware of, and then identify priorities as to what we think should be progressed, and then make recommendations as to what should happen. And so there's been some sort of recent changes around things, for example, to do with bonuses and the credit that you can get for being involved in sort of diversity initiatives, things like that, because one issue that was identified is that it's often sort of women who are doing the non-chargeable work that's really important, things around CSR, responsible business, and making sure that it's properly baked into our systems, that you get some credit and recognition for that.
Explain a little bit more there. So you've got your billable time.
Yes.
And then this is your stuff that you're doing on top of that for the good of yourself or for the good of the company?
Well, both, for the community, for your own, if it's something that's important as a priority to you, the wider firm, the wider community, and that stuff's really important. And as a big business, a big employer in the area, we need to be doing things like that. And it's just making sure that there is some baked-in recognition.
So what would you get? Are you talking about remuneration or...?
It's that certain activities will sort of to an extent count towards your targets. So they're on a par. So
It's very nuanced, that, because it's mainly the women who are going for those extra jobs.
So it has been. And I think the point you make, Francesca, is really important, because like a lot of businesses, we've got our values, and our values are, you know, to support people, to support our communities, to be the best that we can. That does run alongside our ordinary client work. But it's a really important part of our culture to have those shared values. So how do we recognise that people are spending time on that work, which is equally important to our business, even though it doesn't, in the immediate term, produce any financial reward. And I think one of the things I always think about, so I've never worked part-time, but when I look at any part-time workers, whether they're male or female, I always look at it and think, well, actually, it's never quite as simple as taking somebody's target for what should be 5 days of full-time employment and then reducing it by a fifth or 2/5. Because yes, there's the contribution to all of our other business things, such as networks and client business development, but we're also in a profession where we have to continually learn and develop. And so if you're only working 3 days a week, you're coming in, you've still got to do your client work in those 3 days a week, but also we're expecting you to contribute to our networks and to display our values. Oh, and by the way, as well, you've also got to do all of your professional development in those days as well. And I think that's a really hard balance to get right. So those are the kind of issues that we would look to, say, Thrive in the first instance, to explore and talk about how do we get that balance right. And then they've got the direct line into the board. The board can then kind of give a steer on what the business expects and channel that back through to our teams.
So what, in practical terms, could you do then to make that fairer for part-time workers? Because that is not just the legal profession. That is, I'm thinking about the health sector. That is a major, major thing in the health sector.
The first thing you do is you say, well, we need to change the equation, the factor that we apply when setting your targets, because the fact that you're working 0.6 full-time employment, it's not so simple as taking an annual target and multiplying it by 0.6, because you've still got all of the other stuff to do in those 3 days, whereas other people have got 5 days. So actually you might need to reduce the financial target a little bit more. Or if it was the health sector, you're going to have to remove a bit more of the time that people are expected to spend with their patients in order to dedicate to the practice development and all that kind of thing. So
I think that since COVID in particular, there's been a real sort of relaxation of people's attitudes because they've had the data to back up that you can actually just take a little bit of a step back. You don't need to micromanage people. You don't need to worry about where they are at 9:07, because, I mean, it's actually possibly easier for a law firm than a lot of other businesses because the outputs are so much easier to measure. It's very obvious what you are delivering because you fill in timesheets every day. And I've certainly heard lots of there's open conversations if there's a sort of big chunk of time that's needed, maybe, I suppose, more than half a day, but around the edges, sort of 20 minutes to an hour here or there, I wouldn't have a conversation about it. I would just do it.
I wanted to ask about that transatlantic thing, because you're both among like 1,000 lawyers across 27 sites in the UK and the US. You're both based here in the Northeast. Dare I go into the issue of salaries? Does it differ where you're working, how much you get paid?
Yeah, it does. So as a business, we always look at the areas in which our offices are in the UK, and we look at what we perceive to be comparable firms to ourselves pay, and we make sure that we're in line with that or hopefully exceeding that. But the profession over the last few years is part of a salary war driven mainly by what's happening in the city. So big US firms are making a real play for London at the moment. That's driving up the salaries in London. The UK firms that have always been established in the city are therefore having to keep pace, which means that the tier below them have to try and keep pace. And that does have a ripple effect through the regions. And it's exacerbated again by what we started to see during COVID, which is where all of a sudden it became normal to attend client meetings on Teams. Prior to COVID,
you didn't even have Teams.
I don't even think I ever did a video. We used to do conference calls.
You had Skype.
Yeah, and you had the spider phones in the meeting rooms, and you would do conference calls like that. But if I was going to if I was a part of a meeting for an hour and a half, I'd physically get on the train and I'd go down and I'd sit in a meeting room for an hour and a half. That just disappeared overnight. So law firms, to some degree, became a little bit agnostic towards location of their employees. And we found that there were people being offered jobs from London firms, but being allowed to be based still in the Northeast, so still living at home, getting a London salary and being asked, just come down twice a month. So once a fortnight, get on the train, come down and see your team. And that is a challenge because there is a big differential between what you will get paid in the city and the Northeast.
When you say a challenge, as in it's a challenge for the business to keep hold of that talent?
Yes, because...
And for you as a business to keep pace with those wages because it'll just cascade through.
I mean, you just can't...
You can't stay competitive.
You can't be competitive in the Northeast with what people are being paid in the city.
But how does that feel then? So you're based here and you know that you're doing just as good, if not a better job, but getting paid less for it than somebody who happens to live south.
So London weighting is always going to be the most stark of all of the regional weighting. The thing is, the obvious thing then to do is people have to decide what's right for them, what their priorities are. And for example, for some people, remote working for a London firm or in-house for London from the Northeast is brilliant because they don't want to come into the office anyway. And that gives them that freedom and that flexibility. Whereas, say, for me, I like coming into the office, I like seeing people, being around people. So, yes, I could get paid more working from my desk in Gateshead for a London firm or in-house somewhere, but I wouldn't enjoy my working environment as much. So it's just another one of the factors that people have to put into the mix when they're deciding what's right for them.
Yeah. You mentioned geographical areas. How many tiers are there, then, within Womble Bond Dickinson?
Well, the Leeds market for legal services is quite competitive, quite well established. So, Leeds salaries will differ slightly from the Northeast. Bristol, again, that's a big legal centre. It's not too far from London, so there's naturally a bit of a differential there between the Northeast. So they're all fractionally different. I don't think any of them are exactly the same at all levels. And then I suppose when it comes to salaries, you have to look at the individual, what their skill set is, what their experience is, because that's obviously taken into account when setting salary levels as well.
But generally, it's about who you're competing with geographically in that area and also cost of living.
Exactly. Cost of living's the most important.
But you don't want to, ideally, be from a place that's known as cheap labour, do you? You want to, it should be about quality.
But you shouldn't...
Be rewarded for that quality.
You shouldn't value yourself on what you're paid either, and your contribution. I think...
That's very easy for you to say if you're in, like, a managerial role. But if you're kind of, like, lower entrance level and all the rest of it, and you're being told, don't be valued on how much you're paid...
Yeah, I take your point, but if you're in any industry and you look at what you're getting paid at a certain level in the Northeast and what somebody's getting in Manchester or London, there's going to be a differential, and that's for the reasons you said, because of the cost of living in those areas. So yes, you might say, well, on pounds and pence, I'm only getting this much a month, and this person does exactly the same job as me and gets paid this month. But then look at where you're living, look at your access to your facilities, look at the quality of the schools, the public services.
One of the reasons I chose law was that it's something you can have a good career in anywhere in the country. And there is something to be said for still being able to sort of go back to where you came from, work in Newcastle, and get the quality of work and, big ticket, interesting things. You don't have to go to London to do that. So there is a value to that as well, in terms of getting to do the sort of work that you want and not having to compromise on other aspects of your life, but lifestyle, being your family, all of that sort of thing, in order to do that.
What about CEOs and founders who are now in that position of mandating, I want you in, I've spent a fortune on this office, I think it is affecting our performance, and I also want to really see what you're doing with your days. I want you in 3 or 4 days a week. What do you think? What's your opinion?
So I think it's fair enough to have a minimum number of days so that there is a sort of core time when colleagues are sort of seeing each other in person, sort of maintaining those bonds, that sort of thing. And I don't know exactly where the cutoff is, but as a sort of ethos and philosophy, I think that it is trying to put the genie back in the bottle. Things have changed. If you push that too far and are too regimented with it, you are in competition with other employers who are not doing that. And I think that the starting point is that you treat people as grown-ups who are capable of managing their own time. And if there is a specific performance issue with somebody, you address that. You know, if you want to see people because you want to make sure they're working, if you don't trust that your staff are working, if you're not sort of staring at them, then you've got a bigger problem. So I'm not a fan of that. And I do think that personal sort of connections and spending time with people makes a difference. But I also think there is this sort of general idea out there that working remotely can affect performance. But I've never really seen the evidence to back that up. I think it's just a thing people say. So I think they need to calm down.
I think I agree with everything you say there. And my worry is if people are too remote, if they're not coming into the office enough, are they a part of our culture? Because if you think about culture, what it is, it's shared values, it's the way that people interact with each other, the respect they show to each other. Yes, you can do all that remotely, but it's something that happens more organically, more naturally when they're all together. And so if people aren't coming into the office at all, my worry is that they're separating a little bit from the business, perhaps arguably, are they still part of the culture? I hope so. But then forcing people in 5 days a week actually speaks against the culture. Because if you're wanting something that's underpinned by trust and transparency, then you should allow people to be grown up about it and to do their job from home if that's what they prefer on a set number of days.
I also think that if you're too regimented about it, you've got to think about the impact on underrepresented groups in the workforce. The obvious point is that more women than men are the primary carers of their children, or carers more generally, and are therefore more likely in more circumstances to need a little bit more flexibility around when they can and can't work. So you can have sort of a well-meaning policy applying to everyone as having a disproportionate impact on a particular group. That can then have an impact on you achieving other objectives as a business about retaining the best people for the sake, if you were too regimented with it, for the sake of 1 or 2 days a week. That just doesn't make sense to me.
Let's end on positive work culture. What's the magic dust?
I think it should be a friendly environment where people are approachable and feel that they can feel sort of safe to raise things. I also don't think it should be too serious an environment all the time. I think a good dose of silliness is a good thing in the workplace.
I won't argue with that.
Make sure that you're seen as being reliable as a manager, generous with your time, and having those clear conversations with people about themselves and their own career aspirations. And people will thank you for it. And even if sometimes those conversations might feel difficult because somebody isn't quite hitting the standards, we're lucky in our profession that most people receive that kind of feedback the right way. We specifically look for that actually when we recruit people, that they're able to take constructive feedback, and will often thank you for it.
Ian Atkinson and Francesca Hodgson of Womble Bond Dickinson. That was great to hear the legal perspective on flexible working, salaries and social mobility. That point about how to engineer equality in the workplace was fascinating. Changing the point system to benefit applicants from poorer backgrounds. That means the whole legal profession could become much more representative of its clients. It could mean a wholesale work culture and social change. It sounds grandiose, but it's something to think about. So, however and wherever you're listening or watching Both Sides of the Desk, thank you. This is all about sharing ideas to create a more positive work culture for everyone. So please subscribe to the podcast and share it with your friends and colleagues. Data shows that positive work culture boosts productivity, reduces staff turnover, and makes people happier. What's not to love? Well, we'd love you to join the conversation too. Drop us a message on the socials for Newcastle Helix, whether that's LinkedIn, X, Facebook, Instagram, or the YouTube channel. We are all about collaboration here. So on that note, this video podcast was filmed with the help of the incredible team at the Lumen building on the Newcastle Helix site. It was filmed and directed by Chris Taylor, filmed and edited by Jordan McDonald, mixed and mastered by Andy at Blast Studios, and produced and presented by me, Charlie Charlton. The concept emerged in collaboration with Di Gates of Connection Heroes. This is a development program all about the value of human connection at work. So coming up in the next episode of Both Sides of the Desk.
To take something seriously, you should be playing with it.
What he's saying is the robot is okay. I knew it.
From the happy team here at Newcastle Helix, thanks for listening.